Good afternoon, everybody. This is Francis, and for my data collection, I'm going to talk about checklists. To be very honest, I was going to do something a little bit more elaborate than just doing a simple slideshow presentation, but after reading and doing a little bit of research about checklists, I thought that would be over the top, and checklists are not that. Okay, to start, I had a hard time. The only place that I saw the definition or any description was in the Mertler article that we were given to read to supplement our textbook. I didn't see anything that really gave us insight to checklists. So I went online, I looked up checklists, and checklists kind of just gave me an overview of preparing for something, creating a checklist, so it really had nothing to do with education. And then I found a site from the British Council that gave a definition of observational checklists, which are a list of things an observer is going to look at when observing a class. So I thought that was a pretty good definition because we're all in education, so I thought that was the most to the point of what we're working on. Okay, so just looking at some of the questions for a guideline, I would describe this checklist as just a very quick look for. Okay, limited details. For the most part, we're looking at yes or no responses. Was it an observable information, or did you not see it when you were observing students, or if you be an administrator looking at how a teacher's doing? You're just quick look fors, which is a phrase that I've learned through this master's degree, and I find myself using it all the time. I thought it was the best way to describe the checklist method. Okay, processes and procedures. They can identify a variety of behaviors, skills, or characteristics, which is straight from the Mertler, I hope I'm saying that correctly, article or chapter that we read. They're, again, very simple yes or no statements. They need to be limited because, as I'll show a little bit later, checklists can become very overwhelming because they can encompass such a great area for things to look for. So very quick, little detail. Qualitative or quantitative. So through the article that we read, that we were assigned, checklists are considered to be quantitative data. So the way that it works is typically you start with a whole checklist of things you're looking for. Each response would have a point value, so at the end you're assessing your observation with a numerical value. So very quantitative. I did, through further research, find that some people consider it either quantitative or qualitative, and it just depends on how detailed your question is. So open-ended questions or questions with some kind of debatable response could be considered qualitative. So for an example, during teacher's review, he provided individual feedback about his lecture. So for me, I do a lot of lectures followed up with some kind of activity. So if an administrator would come in looking at my teaching style and is looking for feedback, it could be something as simple as a thumbs up or a high five, just a nod of the head, something like that. But if there's something that particular that the observer is looking for, that provides some kind of area for more than a little bit yes, no. If they're looking a little bit more in depth, if they want, well, he talked about the standard and how the lecture reflect about that, that would get into more of a qualitative. And through some of the research I read, a lot of the questions have to do with that type of response as opposed to a simple yes, no. The types of questions, this data is meant to target quick observations. Did he do this or did he not do this? Very simple, to the point. Some of the strengths is it's very quick, very simple, a lot of formative type assessment. So we're not looking at the end of a unit type assessment, this is just on the spot. Are they doing this action that I want them to learn or not? Yes or no. So quick and simple, very formative. Sorry. Some of the weaknesses, there's very little detail. Like I said in the question, if a administrator is looking for a certain key type of feedback, it's yes or no. So it's not saying, did the teacher talk about the PA standards as they were going through and reflecting on their lecture? Did they talk about that in their lecture? That's a lot more detailed. Whether they're just looking for, did the teacher provide feedback and relate the activity to the lecture? So it depends on the question. Can be weak because it doesn't provide for details. It's yes or no statements. Did he or didn't he? Concerns that I have, the validity and the reliability depend on the observer being consistent. Again, if I'm being observed by my principal one day and he says, okay, a thumbs up, a high five, you're acknowledging it, that's the kind of feedback I'm looking for. And then a month later, my assistant principal comes in and says, you know, I noticed that you gave him a thumbs up, but I'd like to see a little bit more. That kind of gray area in there becomes a little bit harder to make it valid or even have reliability. So if the observers are not on the same page, the validity and the reliability kind of have some areas for fault there. Again, the gray area can also become an ethical concern. If I'm working in a cohort and I'm looking for something specific and a person in my cohort is looking for something else, are we answering our yes-no statement? Are we conflicting in that because we're not on the same page? And then finally, here's just a quick couple of examples. So my example on the left is something that you could use in a classroom or as an administrator coming in to observe. So 13 things is not super extensive, something they can look for. It's quick. They can check it off. The example on the right gets a whole lot more extensive. You can see how these kind of yes, no, did they, didn't they responses can really add up and be almost overwhelming. These two examples are for an administrator coming in to observe a teacher, so probably a little bit more easy to handle for an administrator for the form on the right. But if you're a teacher with 35 students working in your manufacturing lab, the example on the right would be extremely overwhelming to look for all of those things on a daily basis amongst 30 students. So you want to stay limited when you're doing checklists for formative assessments to 5 to 10 items. Kind of keep them short so that you can kind of look, you see them, you go back later when you have a moment and mark on your checkbox. The reason that I chose checklists for my group was when before I read the articles, I thought, oh, checklist. Like if I designed this right, what would be different between a checklist and a rubric? Checklists are far simpler than a rubric. Rubrics are in a class all by itself. But that was my reason for choosing the checklist. Because it's so limited, I like that it's a quick, easy formative assessment, but it doesn't give me the detail that I'd be looking for. So maybe preliminary, use a checklist, but as I get through into my research, I think I'd be working more with a rubric and be a little bit more detailed in the areas that I'm looking for. I hope this helps you out with what a checklist is and how we can utilize them in data collection. Good luck to everybody with your research. Thank you.